Hey guys, welcome back to Fiction Flux. Hope you're all doing well. Now let's get into it. The letter arrived on the day All Might retired. Not during the broadcast, not during the speech that the entire country watched with the specific quality of attention people gave to things they understood were historical, the things that would be the answer to where were you when questions for the rest of their lives. After, when the cameras had been packed away and the commission officials had filed out, and the hospital corridor outside his room had gone from crowded to quiet in the specific way that corridors went quiet when the event was over, and the ordinary weight of things reasserted itself. After all of that, a nurse found it, tucked under the door of his hospital room, not delivered through official channels, not processed through the agency or the commission or any of the institutional infrastructure that had managed every piece of communication directed at the symbol of peace for 30 years. Just an envelope. Under the door. His name on the front in handwriting he had not seen in 17 years. But recognized immediately. He picked it up. He sat with it for a long time without opening it. Recovery girl passing by on her evening rounds saw him sitting with the envelope in his hands and the specific quality of stillness he produced when something had arrived that exceeded his capacity for immediate response. She said, "Toshinori." He did not look up. She said, "What is that?" He said, "A letter." She said, "I can see it's a letter. Who is it from?" He said the name. She was quiet. She sat beside him. She said, "You're going to have to open it." He said, "I know." He said, "Give me a moment." She gave him the moment. He opened it. He read it. Recovery girl watched his face while he read. She had known Toshinori Yagi for a very long time, long enough to have a complete catalogue of his expressions, the professional ones and the private ones, and the ones that existed in the specific register between those two categories, the ones that happened when something real arrived that the professional infrastructure had no framework for. She watched his face go through 3 separate things while he read. The first thing was recognition. The second thing was something she did not have a single word for, the specific simultaneous arrival of grief and warmth, and something that had been waiting for a very long time. The third thing was the specific expression of someone who had been carrying something alone for 17 years, and had just been told they were not carrying it alone anymore. He finished reading. He held the letter in his hands. He said, "She knows." Recovery girl said, "Yes." He said, "She's known for 2 years." She said, "What does the letter say?" He looked at it. He read out loud. He read, "Dear Dad, I have been practicing how to start this letter for 2 years, and that is still the best opening I have found. Direct seemed better than indirect. I have notebooks about this decision. My name is Toshi Yagi. I am 16 years old. I live in Nagoya with my mother, who has been the most honest person in my life since the day she told me about you when I was 14. She told me everything. I have not been angry about the secret. I understand why it was kept, and I have written about that understanding extensively. I have 14 notebooks total, 12 of which are about becoming a hero and 2 of which are about figuring out how to talk to you. I watched your retirement today. I watched it and I felt something I do not have precise language for, and I decided that imprecise language was better than continued silence. I want to meet you. Not because I need something from you, not because I am angry or because I want acknowledgement or because I have an agenda that this meeting would serve. I want to meet you because you are my father, and I have wanted to know you since I found out you existed, and I am done waiting for the correct moment, because the correct moment keeps not arriving. I will be in Tokyo next month for the UA entrance exam. I thought you should know. Toshi. He folded the letter carefully. He held it. Recovery girl said, "She's sitting the entrance exam." He said, "Yes." She said, "She wants to be a hero." He said, "Apparently." She said, 14 notebooks. He said, 12 about hero work, 2 about how to talk to me. Recovery girl looked at him. She said, "She sounds like someone." He said, "Yes." He said, "She does." He looked at the letter. He said, "I have to call her mother." Recovery girl said, "Yes, you do." He said, 17 years. She said, "Yes." He said, "I owe them both more than I know how to calculate." She said, "Then start calculating." He looked at her. She said, "Toshinori, you just retired. You have time that you have never had before, use it correctly. He said, yes. He said, you're right. He picked up his phone. He dialed a number he had kept in his contacts for 17 years without calling. He listened to it ring. She answered. He said, Hana. And on the other end of the line, after a silence that contained 17 years of its own specific weight, a voice said, I was wondering when you would call. Okay, we have to go back. Because you cannot understand the letter or the entrance exam or any of what comes next without understanding how a secret daughter of the symbol of peace existed for 16 years without anyone knowing. And that story starts not with All Might, but with Toshinori Yagi. Before the symbol. Before the number one. Before any of the infrastructure of being the most recognizable person in the world had been built around him. When he was 22 years old and newly, the holder of One for All, and still figuring out who Toshinori Yagi was underneath the hero he was becoming. He was in Osaka for 3 weeks on a training assignment. Not yet famous, not yet the symbol, known in hero circles as an exceptional new talent, unknown everywhere else as anything other than a tall young man who ordered too much food at restaurants and had the specific quality of presence that made people feel safe without knowing why. She was a graduate student in structural engineering. She had been eating alone at the restaurant where he ordered too much food. He had said, I am deeply sorry to bother you, but I ordered for 6 people by accident, and my trainer has gone home, and I cannot eat all of this by myself. Would you be willing to help with this situation? She had looked at him. She had looked at the table full of food. She had said, that is a genuinely impressive amount of food. He had said, I have a complicated relationship with portion sizes. She had said, sit down. They had talked for 4 hours. Not about heroes, she knew he was a hero student, the physique made it difficult to miss, but she had not been interested in that. She had been interested in what he thought about things, what he found funny, what he was afraid of, the specific interior life of the person underneath the hero trajectory. Nobody asked him those questions. He talked for 4 hours. He came back the next night. And the night after. For 3 weeks he ate dinner with Yagi Hana, who was a structural engineer, and who was interested in what he thought about things, and who laughed at the right moments, and who was, he understood by the end of the 3 weeks, the most real interaction he had had since One for All had arrived in his life, and made everything complicated. The 3 weeks ended. He went back to Tokyo. They wrote letters, actual paper letters because she preferred them, and he found he did too, the physical process of writing something down creating a quality of honesty that other formats did not. For 8 months they wrote letters. And then she came to Tokyo for a conference, and he took her to every place in the city that mattered to him, and by the end of the visit, the letters were not the primary mode of communication anymore. For 2 years they navigated something that did not have a clean name, the specific configuration of 2 people who had found something real in a world that was becoming increasingly complicated for him specifically. The hero career was accelerating, the fame was building, the infrastructure of being the symbol of peace was beginning to assemble itself around him. She had watched this happen with the specific clear-eyed attention of a structural engineer assessing a building under increasing load. She had said once, I need you to be honest with me about something. He had said, always. She had said, is there space, in what this is becoming, for what we are? He had looked at her. He had not answered immediately. She had said, I'm not asking you to choose, I'm asking you to be honest. He had said, I don't know. She had said, that's honest. She had said, I think I need more than I don't know. He had said, I know. They had sat with that. For 3 months they had sat with that in the specific way of 2 people who had found something real and were trying to figure out if real was enough against the weight of what his life was becoming. And then she had told him she was pregnant. He had gone very still. She had watched him go still with the specific attention she brought to everything. She had said, I am not telling you this to make the decision for you, I am telling you because you deserve to know. He had said, Hana. She had said, I have already decided what I'm going to do. I'm going to have this baby and I'm going to raise them, and I'm going to do it with or without your involvement, because I am capable of doing it and I want to. She had said, the question is only what role you want. He had said, I want. He had stopped. She had waited. He had said, I want to be there, I want to be a father, I want. He had looked at his hands. He had said, I am becoming something that has no privacy, no margins. The person who will be number one cannot have private things, cannot have vulnerabilities, cannot have anyone close to them who can be used as leverage or as a target. He had said, if anyone knew about you, about this baby, they would become the most effective threat anyone could make against me. He had said, I am not choosing the career over you, I am trying to protect you by. She had said, by keeping us secret. He had said, yes. She had looked at him for a long time. She had said, I understand the reasoning. She had said, I don't like it. He had said, I know. She had said, but I understand it. She had said, here is what I need from you if we do this the way you're describing. She had said, honesty, always, if anything changes, if the situation changes, if you change, I need to know. She had said, and I need you to know this child, even if it's from a distance, even if it's complicated. I need this child to have a father who knows them even if the world doesn't know about it. He had said, yes, to all of it. She had said, promise me. He had said, I promise. He had kept that promise for 14 years. Monthly visits that no commission record documented, a private phone line that went to a number not associated with the hero infrastructure. Letters, still letters, because she still preferred them, that arrived and were kept in a box that was the most carefully guarded object in his personal possession. A daughter named Toshi, who had his eyes and her mother's precision, and the specific combination of their qualities that produced something neither of them had fully predicted. Who had 14 notebooks. The phone call with Hana lasted 2 hours. He listened more than he spoke. This was correct. He had 17 years of listening to catch up on, and she gave him the information with the specific organized clarity of someone who had been a structural engineer for 2 decades and who communicated in accurate structures. She told him about Toshi at 14, the conversation, how she had done it and what Toshi had said, and the 2 weeks of processing that had followed, and the 14 notebooks that had emerged from the processing. She told him about watching Toshi become someone. Not in the general terms, in the specific terms, what she noticed, what was his and what was hers and what was entirely Toshi's own. She said, she has your stubbornness about the things that matter. He said, that's a charitable description. She said, I know, I'm being charitable because she also has my precision, so the stubbornness is at least well documented. He said, 14 notebooks. She said, 12 about hero work and 2 about you. Yes. He said, what do the 2 about me say? She said, I haven't read them, they're hers. He said, of course. He said, Hana. She said, yes. He said, I am sorry. She was quiet. He said, not for the secrecy. I stand by the reasoning even if I regret the cost of it. I'm sorry for. He stopped. She said, for what? He said, for the specific loneliness of it. For you, for 16 years of doing something real alone. She said, I wasn't entirely alone. My sister knew, 2 close friends knew. Toshi is very good company. He said, I know, but. She said, yes, but. She said, Toshinori. He said, yes. She said, I made the decision too. I want you to remember that. The secrecy was not something done to me, it was something we decided together. He said, you were more gracious about it than I deserved. She said, probably, but I don't regret it. I regret the distance. I don't regret protecting her. He said, she wants to be a hero. She said, since she was 4 years old, it was never going to be anything else. He said, the entrance exam is next month. She said, yes. He said, she wrote that she wants to meet me. She said, she has wanted that for 2 years. The letter took 2 years to write. He said, 2 notebooks. She said, 2 notebooks to figure out how to say, I want to know you. He was quiet. She said, she's not angry at you, I want you to know that. She processed the anger, she writes about everything she processes, and she came out the other side of it, and what was on the other side was not anger. He said, what was on the other side? She said, curiosity, and something she calls wanting the full picture. He said, she sounds. She said, yes, she does. He said, can I call her? She said, you can, or you can wait for Tokyo. He said, I don't want to wait for Tokyo. She said, then call her, I'll let her know. He said, thank you. She said, Toshinori. He said, yes. She said, she has been waiting for this for 2 years. Try not to be so careful that she can't feel it. He said, feel what? She said that you're glad she exists. He said, I have always been glad she exists. She said she doesn't know that yet, tell her. He said, yes. He called her that evening. The phone rang 3 times. She answered. She said, hello. He had prepared things to say. He had spent the 3 hours between hanging up with Hana and dialing Toshi's number preparing. He had notes. He had been the symbol of peace for 30 years. He had given speeches at national events and addressed crises and spoken in the specific register of someone who had calibrated their public communication to the highest professional standard. She said hello, and everything he had prepared went somewhere he could not immediately locate. He said, Toshi. She said, yes. He said, it's. She said, I know who it is, Dad. The word landed. He said nothing for a moment. She said, sorry, is that, I can call you something else if. He said, no. He said, no, that's please. She said, okay. He said, I got your letter. She said, I know, Mom told me you called her first. He said, I needed to, I wanted to make sure she knew I was. She said, it's okay, that was the right order. He said, is it? She said, she's been doing the actual work for 16 years. You should check in with her first. He was quiet. He said, you're very practical. She said, I have notebooks about it. He said, your mother mentioned the notebooks. She said, 12 about hero work and 2 about you. He said, yes. She said, the 2 about you are private. He said, I understand. She said, the 12 about hero work I'll share if you want to read them. He said, I would like that very much. She said, they're mostly analysis, quirk mechanics, tactical frameworks, efficiency calculations. He said, mostly. She said, there are some sections that are about other things. He said, what other things? She said, what it means to do this, to be a hero, the philosophy of it. She said, I've been thinking about it differently lately. He said, how so? She said, most people think about heroism as the response to threats, the intervention, the visible action. She said, I've been thinking about it as the condition you create, the world where fewer threats need responding to because the conditions that produce threats have been addressed. He said, that's. He said, Toshi, that's. She said, I know it sounds like I'm avoiding the exciting parts. He said, no, it sounds like you understand something that most people who want to be heroes don't understand until much later. She was quiet. She said, you're being encouraging because you're my father. He said, I'm being accurate because I've been doing this for 30 years. She said, oh. He said, the distinction matters. She said, yes, it does. He said, I read your letter many times. She said, I wrote it many times, before the final version. He said, I know, 2 notebooks. She said, the first notebook was mostly angry, I burned it. He said, you burned it. She said, I wrote the angry version and then I read it and I thought, this is not what I actually want to say. This is the processing. And then I processed it and the second notebook was the version that knew what it actually wanted to say. He said, what did it want to say? She said, the letter. He said, the letter said you want to know me. She said, yes. He said, can I tell you something? She said, yes. He said, I have wanted to know you since before you were born. She was quiet. He said, the secrecy was not about not wanting. The secrecy was about not being able to have what I wanted without putting you and your mother at risk. That distinction. She said, matters, yes. She said, I know. She said, I wrote about the distinction in the second notebook. He said, what did you conclude? She said, I concluded that I understand it and I believe it, and it still had a cost that I'm allowed to feel. He said, yes. He said, you are completely allowed to feel that cost. She said, I know, I gave myself permission in week 3 of the processing. He said, week 3. She said, the processing took 6 weeks. I document by week for longer projects. He said, I see. He said, Toshi. She said, yes. He said, I am glad you exist. Silent. He said, not because of what you might become. Not because of the hero career or the notebooks or any of the things that are impressive about you, which are many. I am glad you exist because you exist and you are mine, and I have been glad about that since before the world knew about it. Long silence. She said, Mom said you would say something like that. He said, did she? She said, don't let him be so careful that you can't feel it. He said, your mother is very wise. She said, yes. He said, can you feel it? She said, yes. She said, I'm writing it down so I don't lose the specific texture of it. He said, good. He said, I have letters, the ones your mother and I wrote, 17 years of them. I've kept all of them. She said, she kept hers too, the ones you sent. He said, I would like to when we meet. If you want, I can bring some of them. She said, yes, I want that. He said, next month, Tokyo. She said, the entrance exam is on the 14th. He said, I'll be there. She said, you don't have to. He said, I'll be there. She was quiet. She said, okay. He said, get some sleep, the exam requires. She said, I know what the exam requires. I have 3 notebooks specifically about the exam structure. He said, of course you do. She said, good night, Dad. He said, good night, Toshi. He sat in the dark of his hospital room for a long time after. Recovery girl found him still sitting there an hour later. She said, well. He said, she said, good night, Dad. Recovery girl looked at him. She said, and? He said, and I think I am going to be okay. She said, you're going to be more than okay. He said, yes. He said, I'm going to be a father. She said, you've been a father for 16 years. He said, I'm going to be one correctly now. She said, good. She handed him his medication. She left. He took it. He picked up his phone. He looked at the contact labeled T. He wrote, I forgot to ask, what are your hero notebooks about specifically? I want to be prepared for when I read them. 3 minutes passed. She wrote back everything, quirk mechanics, tactical analysis, hero philosophy, structural efficiency, the gap between what the system is and what the system should be. She wrote, also there are 17 pages about All Might's combat approach that I wrote before I knew you were All Might. I want you to know up front that the analysis is critical in several places. He read this. He wrote, I look forward to the critical analysis. She wrote, you might change your mind when you read it. He wrote, I spent 30 years being told my approach was perfect. I find I am interested in accurate assessment for once. Long pause. She wrote, okay, fair. She wrote also, I'm glad you called tonight. He wrote, I am glad you wrote the letter. She wrote, it took 2 notebooks. He wrote, it was worth 2 notebooks. She wrote, yes. She wrote, good night again. He wrote, good night. He put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling. He thought, she has 17 pages of critical analysis of my combat approach. He thought, I cannot wait to read them. He smiled. Not the symbol of peace smile. The other one. The one that Toshinori Yagi produced when something real arrived. The entrance exam was on a Tuesday. He arrived before the applicants. He stood near the observation area, not in official capacity. He had no official capacity anymore. He was simply a tall, thin man in a coat that was too large for him, watching a crowd of extraordinary young people file into an examination that would determine the next chapter of their lives. He was looking for her. He had seen photographs. Her mother had sent them over the years, the annual birthday photo that arrived without fail on the 14th of March. He had kept all of them in the same box as the letters. He found her immediately. Not because she looked like him, she had her mother's face, the structure of it, the precision in the eyes. She had his height, which at 16 was making her one of the tallest people in the applicant crowd. He found her because she was writing. Standing in the middle of the crowd, with a notebook open and writing, while people moved around her with the specific focused quality of someone for whom this was not distraction, but preparation. The last thoughts before the exam organized through the act of putting them on paper. He watched her write. She looked up from the notebook and looked at the examination facility with the specific expression of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years, and had arrived at it and was taking its measure. She did not look nervous. She looked ready. He thought she is going to be extraordinary. He thought she already is. He thought, I have missed 16 years of watching her be extraordinary, and I am going to spend however many years I have left watching from the correct distance. She put the notebook away. She looked at the facility. She looked at the crowd. And then he did not know how, he did not understand the mechanism, he had no explanation for it except that some things happened before reason caught up. She looked directly at him. Across the crowd. Directly at him. He was not in hero form. He was not recognizable as All Might. He was a tall, thin man in a coat that was too large, and she should not have been able to identify him. She looked at him. He looked at her. She did the thing that he had watched in the birthday photographs for 16 years, the small specific tilt of her head that her mother did when she was assessing something and had reached a preliminary conclusion. She nodded. He nodded back. She walked into the exam. He stood in the observation area and felt the specific weight of something real having arrived. He had a lot of catching up to do. He was ready to start. She passed the exam. Not barely, not at the edge of what the preparation had equipped her for. She passed with the specific decisive margin of someone who had been ready for the exam since well before the exam was announced. Her quirk was not dramatic. This was the first thing people noticed about her results. The quirk, an enhancement ability that she had described to him in their second phone call as structural reinforcement. I can reinforce the physical structure of things, including my own body. It's not flashy, but it's very precise. Had produced numbers in the assessment that were high, but not the highest in the cohort. What was the highest in the cohort was her rescue points. The highest rescue points score in the exam's recorded history. Because she had spent the entire practical not on the combat robots but on the people around them, reading the crowd, identifying who was in trouble before they were in trouble, getting there first, covering angles that other applicants had not seen because other applicants were looking at the robots. She had been looking at the people. When the zero-pointer appeared, she was already positioned to manage the crowd response. The specific chaos that a zero-pointer produced in a group of inexperienced applicants, the panic, the freezing, the instinct errors that produced secondary injuries, she had mapped that probability and positioned herself for it. Nobody had been seriously hurt in her sector. The rescue examiner had filed a specific note. The note said, Applicant 2247 demonstrated situational awareness and preemptive rescue capability beyond the scope of the exam parameters. Recommend assessment of tactical training background. He read the note when it was forwarded to him through channels that he still had access to despite retirement. He wrote to her, the examiner noted your preemptive positioning. She wrote back, I wrote 17 probability maps for crowd behavior in zero-pointer scenarios. The positioning was the output of the maps. He wrote 17 probability maps. She wrote, I like to be prepared. He wrote, I have noticed. She wrote, the combat score is lower than I wanted. He wrote, the rescue score is the highest in recorded history. She wrote, yes, but the combat gap needs addressing. He wrote, you're being critical of the highest rescue score in the exam's history. She wrote, I'm being accurate about a documented gap in my performance profile. He wrote, your mother's precision. She wrote, is that a problem? He wrote, it is the opposite of a problem. She wrote, okay. She wrote, also I got in. He wrote, I know. He wrote, congratulations. She wrote, thank you. She wrote, I'm going to Tokyo. He wrote, yes. He wrote, I'm in Tokyo. Long pause. She wrote, I know. She wrote, can we have dinner before the term starts? He wrote, yes. He wrote, name the restaurant. She wrote, somewhere with a lot of food. I heard you have a complicated relationship with portion sizes. He sat in his apartment and felt the smile arrive. The real one. He wrote, I know a place. The dinner lasted 4 hours. This was characteristic. He had known it would be characteristic because he had learned in their phone calls that she had inherited his relationship with time when something interested her. It expanded, became its own country, stopped being relevant as a constraint. She brought notebooks. Not the hero ones, she explained this up front. She said, "The hero notebooks are for you. These are the ones I brought for tonight." She put 2 notebooks on the table. He looked at them. She said, "The 2 about you." He said, "You said those were private." She said, "They were. I've decided to unprivate them." He said, "You don't have to." She said, "I want you to have accurate information about what I was processing. You deserve that." She pushed them across the table. He said, "May I read them now?" She said, "That's why I brought them." He picked up the first one. She ordered food while he read. A significant amount of food. He noticed this and felt something that was warm and complicated, and located somewhere that was not a category he had a name for. He read. The first notebook was what she had said, the angry version, except she had not burned this one. She had just labeled it Processing, Volume 1, and it was the honest record of a 14-year-old who had just been told a significant thing, and was working through what that significant thing meant. It was angry, she had been right about that. But the anger was precise, organized. It did not sprawl or repeat itself. It made its points and moved to the next one, and documented its own arrival and departure with the specific clarity of someone who had been taught that feelings were information worth recording accurately. He read every word. He read the line, "I am angry that he decided to protect me from something without asking me if I wanted that protection. I understand the reasoning. The reasoning is structurally sound. I am angry anyway, and both things are true simultaneously." He read the line, "I am angry that the world got to have him and I didn't. That is not rational. I am writing it down anyway because Notebook 1 is for the not rational things." He read the last line of Notebook 1. She had written, "I think when I am done being angry I am going to want to know him. I am writing this now so I remember it when I get there." He picked up Notebook 2. She was eating and watching him read with the specific quality of attention she brought to things she had decided to be honest about. Notebook 2 was different. It was the version after the processing, the one that knew what it wanted to say. It was careful and precise and organized in the way that her mother organized structures, load-bearing elements identified, dependencies mapped, the specific architecture of a decision laid out so the decision could be evaluated rather than just felt. She had written, "I have decided I want to know him. Here is what that means." And then she had mapped it. What knowing him meant, what she needed from it and what she did not need, what she was bringing to it and what she was asking him to bring, the specific structure of the relationship she wanted to build and the conditions she needed for it to be real. She had written, "I do not need him to be All Might. I have analyzed All Might extensively in the other notebooks. I need him to be the person who ordered too much food in Osaka 22 years ago and wrote letters for 17 years and has a coat that is too large for him." She had written, "I need him to be Toshinori Yagi, who is my father. That is all." He finished the second notebook. He put it down. She was looking at him. He said, "You are extraordinary." She said, "You're being encouraging because you're my father." He said, "I told you the distinction matters." She said, "Yes, you did." He said, "I am being accurate because these notebooks are the most honest documents I have ever read." She said, "More honest than 17 years of letters." He said, "The letters were honest too. These are honest in a different direction." She said, "Inward instead of outward." He said, "Yes." He looked at the notebooks. He said, "You wrote that you need me to be Toshinori Yagi, not All Might." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have spent 30 years being All Might so thoroughly that Toshinori Yagi became the costume and All Might became the person." She said, "I know, I read the analysis on it." He said, "You analyzed that." She said, Notebook 8, the psychological cost of symbol maintenance over extended periods. It's in the hero philosophy section. He looked at her. He said, "May I read Notebook 8? She said, "Yes, after you answer something." He said, "Okay." She said, "The line I wrote, that I need you to be Toshinori Yagi, can you do that?" He looked at her. He thought about 30 years of All Might, the smile and the muscles and the voice and the symbol, the specific costume of being the #1 hero that had become so thorough he sometimes could not find the person underneath. He thought about a coat that was too large, about letters, about a restaurant in Osaka and 4 hours of someone asking him what he thought about things. He said, Toshinori Yagi is someone who ate too much food in Osaka and talked to a structural engineer for 4 hours and wrote letters for 17 years. He said, Toshinori Yagi is someone who has been carrying something alone, because he thought it was the safest way, and who has arrived at the end of that period, understanding that alone is not always the same as safe. He said, Toshinori Yagi is someone who is sitting across a dinner table from his daughter for the first time, and has read 2 notebooks that are the most honest thing he has ever encountered, and who wants nothing more than to spend the next, however many years he is getting to know the person who wrote them. He said, yes, I can do that. She looked at him. She reached across the table. She picked up notebook 8. She handed it to him. She said, start with page 34, that's where the analysis gets interesting. He took the notebook. He started reading. They stayed for 4 hours. He ordered too much food. She helped. The term started. She walked into UA as Yagi Toshi, first year, class 1A, a name that was connected to nothing institutional, a clean registration, no flag in any database because the secret had been kept for 16 years by people who were very careful about keeping it. She sat in the 3rd seat from the left in the 2nd row. She opened her notebook. She wrote at the top of the first page, first day, UA Hero Program. She wrote, the goal is not to become the symbol of peace, that's his work and it's done. She wrote, the goal is to figure out what comes after symbols. She wrote, I have notebooks about it. She looked up. The classroom was filling with extraordinary young people who were going to become the next generation of heroes. She observed them with the specific quality of attention she brought to things she was going to write about. She was going to write about all of them. She was aware, going to be compared to the previous owner of the name she did not carry publicly, but which lived in her in the specific genetic and cultivated way that parents lived in children. She had notebooks about that too. She wrote, I am not All Might's daughter in the sense that my goal is to continue his work. I am his daughter in the sense that I have his stubbornness about the things that matter and his tendency to order too much food and his specific belief that what heroism is for is the condition it creates rather than the interventions it performs. She wrote, I am my mother's daughter in the sense that I understand structures and I can read load-bearing elements, and I know the difference between what something appears to be and what it actually is. She wrote, I am my own person in the sense of the 17 probability maps and the notebook system, and the 17 pages of critical analysis of All Might's combat approach. She wrote, the combination produces something. She wrote, I am going to find out what. She closed the notebook. The teacher walked in. The year began. The first person she told was not planned. It happened on the roof. She had found the roof in week 2, the specific location for a specific quality of thinking that she had been looking for since she arrived. She was on it at 7 in the morning writing when she heard footsteps. She did not look up. She finished her sentence. She looked up. Green hair, freckles, ink on his fingers, the specific notebook-carrying quality of someone who had arrived at a rooftop for the same reason she was there. He stopped when he saw her. He said, sorry, I didn't know anyone else came up here. She said, I found it in week 2. He said, I found it in week 1. She said, sit down. He sat. They were quiet. He said, you're Yagi Toshi. She said, yes. He said, the rescue points. She said, yes. He said, 17 probability maps. She turned to look at him. She said, how do you know about the probability maps? He said, you mentioned them to Uraraka in the training ground, and I was nearby, and I write down things that are interesting. She said, you write things down. He said, constantly. She looked at him. He said, Midoriya Izuku. She said, I know who you are. I have analysis on everyone in the class. Yours is in notebook 14. He said, what does it say? She said that you have something you're still learning to hold, and you are doing so with a level of dedication that exceeds what the situation strictly requires. He said, that's accurate. She said, I know. He said, you have analysis on everyone in the class. She said, yes. He said, in a notebook. She said, yes. He said, how many notebooks total? She said, 21 now. UA started a new one. He said, I have notebooks too. She said, I know, I observed that in week 1. He said, how many do you have about me? She said, 3 pages so far, you're interesting. He said 3 pages in 2 weeks. She said the dedication to holding ratio is analytically significant. He said, what does that mean? She said, it means most people with power learn to use what they have. You are learning what you have at the same time as learning to use it. That's unusual. He said, it's complicated. She said, yes, most interesting things are. They were quiet. He said, your name. She said, yes. He said, Yagi. She looked at him. He said, All Might's name is Yagi, Yagi Toshinori. She said, yes. He said, and your name is Yagi Toshi. She said, yes. He said, is that? She said, yes. He was quiet. He said, does anyone else know? She said, no. He said, why are you telling me? She thought about it. She said, because you have notebooks, and you write things down because they matter to you, and the things that matter to you are the same kinds of things that matter to me. She said, and because the roof is the place I go when I need to say true things and you're on the roof, and I found I want to say a true thing. He said, okay. He said, it stays here. She said, yes. He said, can I ask something? She said, yes. He said, what's it like, knowing? She thought about 2 notebooks and 6 weeks of processing, and the angry one and the unangry one and the dinner in Tokyo that lasted 4 hours. She said, complicated, and better than not knowing. She said, the complicated is worth the better. He said, yes. He said, I think that's true about most things. She wrote about this in Notebook 22 that evening. She wrote, Midoriya Izuku is going to be one of the most significant people in whatever comes next. I can see the load-bearing elements of it already. He is currently operating under significant structural stress from something I don't have full information on. He is managing it with the specific stubbornness of someone who has decided that the carrying is worth it. She wrote, I recognize that stubbornness from 2 directions. She drew a small star. Her father came to Tokyo every 2 weeks. Not officially, not in ways that connected to any institutional record. He came as Toshinori Yagi in the coat that was too large, and they ate dinner at the restaurant where he ordered too much food, and she brought the current notebook and they talked for 4 hours. She brought him notebook 8 on the 3rd visit. He read it during dinner. He put it down when he finished. He said, the analysis on page 34. She said, yes. He said, you concluded that the symbol of peace function was structurally necessary for a specific period and is now structurally counterproductive. She said, yes. He said, because the world organized itself around the symbol rather than around its own capacity to function. She said, yes, the symbol created dependency. The retirement disrupts the dependency, which is destabilizing short-term, but necessary for structural health long-term. He said, you wrote this when you were 15. She said, the analysis was clearer at 15 because I didn't have the emotional weight of caring about you yet. Cleaner data. He said, and now? She said, the analysis is the same. The weight of caring about you makes it harder to write, but not less accurate. He said, what does the analysis say about what comes next? She said, it says the next generation needs to build something that doesn't require a symbol, that operates through distributed capacity instead of centralized representation. She said, it says the hero world needs to become a structure rather than a person. He said, and you think you can help build that structure? She said, I think I understand structures. He said, your mother's precision. She said, and your stubbornness about the things that matter. He looked at her. He said, what things matter? She said, that people are safe, that the conditions for safety are built and maintained, that the next generation doesn't have to pay what your generation paid. He said, those are the right things. She said, I know, I have notebooks about them. He said, I want to read all of them. She said, you have time. He said, yes. He said, I do. He said, that's new. She said, retirement. He said, yes. She said, Notebook 9 has an analysis of how retired heroes historically fail to transition successfully because they cannot locate their value outside the hero function. He said, I haven't read Notebook 9 yet. She said, I'll bring it next time. He said, am I going to be okay? She looked at him. She said, the analysis suggests the transition is high risk, but manageable with correct structural support. He said, and what is correct structural support? She said, people who know the actual version of you, not All Might, Toshinori Yagi. She said, I'm working on that list. He looked at her. He said, is it a short list? She said, it was, I'm adding to it. He said, are you on it? She said, I'm writing it, I'm not on it, I'm the one writing it. He said, you should be on it. She thought about it. She said, okay. She said, I'll add myself. He smiled. The real one. She wrote about it that night. She wrote, he smiled tonight, not the All Might smile, the other one, the one that his face produces when something real has arrived. She wrote, I am going to spend a significant number of the years ahead making sure that smile has reasons to exist. She wrote, I have notebooks about how. She underlined it. She closed the notebook. She opened the next one. She wrote at the top, ongoing. She looked at the word. She kept it. She began. And that is the story of Yagi Toshi, the daughter nobody knew about, who had 2 notebooks about her father and 12 about becoming a hero, and who walked into UA carrying the specific combination of her mother's precision and her father's stubbornness and her own 17 probability maps. Who found the roof in week 2 and told the truth on it. Who brought notebook 8 to dinner and watched her father read it and saw the real smile arrive. Who is going to build the structure that comes after symbols. She has notebooks about it. All of them. No cap, she was built different before she even walked through the door. And 22 notebooks proved it. Every single page. The second month of UA was when the class started becoming real to her. Not the first month. The first month was assessment. She had been honest about this in Notebook 22, written it clearly in the section she titled Calibration Period. The first month was data collection, learning who people were at the surface level before the surface gave way to something more accurate. The second month was when the surface started giving way. It happened differently for each of them. Some of them had their surfaces give way dramatically, the villain attack in the USJ, the specific pressure of genuine danger removing every optional layer and leaving only what was actually there. Some of them gave way quietly, in the accumulated weight of ordinary days that asked more than ordinary things. She watched all of it. She wrote about all of it. Notebook 22 became Notebook 23 in the second month. She was writing faster than she had predicted. She wrote, the calibration period is complete, beginning actual assessment. She wrote, what I am finding is that the surface presentations in this class are significantly more different from the interior realities than in any previous environment I have been in. This cohort has learned to manage what they show in ways that suggest the managed version is protective rather than performative. She wrote, the question is what they are protecting. She wrote, I am beginning to find out. Uraraka found her on the roof on a Thursday afternoon. Not accidentally, she had the quality of someone who had been looking for the specific location rather than happening upon it. She came up the stairs with the specific purposeful energy she brought to things she had decided to do. She said, I've been looking for this place. Toshi said, I found it in week 2. Uraraka said, Midoriya found it in week 1. Toshi said, yes, he told me. Uraraka sat down. The spot she chose was close to Toshi's spot, but not too close, the specific calibration of someone who understood spatial communication. She said, you write constantly. Toshi said, yes. She said, more than Midoriya, which is something I did not think was possible. Toshi said, I have more notebooks currently, he'll catch up, he's accelerating. Uraraka looked at her. She said, you analyze everyone. Toshi said, yes. She said, including me. Toshi said, yes. She said, what does my analysis say? Toshi considered this. She said, it says you are the most genuinely warm person in this class, and the warmth is not a performance. It is structural. It is what you are made of at the foundation level. She said, it also says you are carrying something about your family's situation, that the warmth exists alongside rather than instead of. She said, and that the combination of those two things, the genuine warmth and the real weight, is going to make you one of the most important heroes of your generation, because you understand something most people with power don't understand. Uraraka said, what do I understand? Toshi said that the people who need protecting are not abstractions, they are specific, they have specific weights they are carrying, and protecting them means seeing the specific weight, not just the general category of person in danger. Uraraka was very quiet. She said, "How do you see that?" Toshi said, "My mother is a structural engineer. She taught me that the load-bearing elements of a structure are rarely the most visible ones. Usually they are inside. Usually you have to look for them specifically." She said, "I look for them specifically." Uraraka said, "In people?" Toshi said, "Yes." Uraraka was quiet for a moment. She said, "Can I ask you something?" Toshi said, "Yes." She said, "Your name?" Toshi said, "Yes." She said, "Midoriya told me something, not the specific thing, just that there was something I might want to know about you that was yours to tell." Toshi looked at the city. She had been thinking about this since the roof conversation with Midoriya, about the telling, about who and when and what the conditions were for sharing true things. She had written about it in Notebook 23. She had written, "The question of who to tell is a structural question. It is about load-bearing capacity, who can hold the information without it changing what the information is." She looked at Uraraka. She thought about genuine warmth that was structural, about someone who saw specific people with specific weights. She said, "My father is Yagi Toshinori." Uraraka's expression went through several things. She said, "All Might." Toshi said, "Yes." She said, "You're." Toshi said, "Yes." She said, "Nobody knows." Toshi said, "3 people at UA now, you, Midoriya, me." Uraraka said, "Midoriya knew before me." Toshi said, "He was on the roof. The roof is where I tell true things." Uraraka looked at the roof with new understanding. She said, "Does it, is it?" Toshi said, "Complicated, and better than not knowing, and getting less complicated as it goes." Uraraka said, "The dinners." Toshi said, "Yes." Uraraka said, "Every 2 weeks." Toshi said, "You notice the pattern." Uraraka said, "I notice things too, different from you. I notice when people seem lighter after something." She said, "You seem lighter on Thursday evenings." Toshi looked at her. She said, "I have notebooks about it." Uraraka smiled. "The full one." She said, "You sound like him." Toshi said, "Which one?" Uraraka said, "Both of them, at the same time, in different proportions." Toshi wrote about this later. She wrote, "Uraraka said I sound like both of them at the same time in different proportions. I have been trying to quantify the proportions since she said it and I cannot, which is probably the point." She wrote, "Some things resist quantification. I am adding that to the framework." The USJ happened on a Tuesday. She had probability maps for villain attack scenarios. She had been building them since the hero notebook started, the specific habit of a structural engineer's daughter who understood that load-bearing elements failed in predictable ways and that predicting the failure was the beginning of preventing it. None of her probability maps had fully accounted for the warp gate. She revised this later, page 1 of a new section. She wrote, "Probability mapping failure at the USJ. The warp gate as a vector exceeded the parameters of my model, adding new variable category, instantaneous geographic displacement of threat source." During the attack, she did what she had done in the entrance exam. She looked at the people. Not the villains, other people were handling the villains. She looked at the students around her, who was frozen, who was functional, who needed the specific intervention of someone whose job in this moment was not combat, but the management of the human response to a crisis. She moved through the USJ like she had moved through the entrance exams, zero-pointer crowd. Preemptive, precise, getting to people before the moment of freeze became entrenched. She pulled 3 people back from positions that would have been compromised. She redirected 2 more away from a conflict zone that was about to expand. She found Uraraka and covered her flank for 40 seconds while she finished a capture, and then they moved together because moving together made sense, and they both understood that without needing to say it. The attack ended. She sat on the floor of the USJ in the aftermath and opened Notebook 23. She wrote, "USJ, Active Threat Engagement, Personal Performance Assessment." She wrote, "Positives, Preemptive Positioning Effective, Uraraka Coordination Successful, 0 Personal Injuries." She wrote, "Areas for Improvement, the Warp Gate Variable, The response delay on the eastern collapse, I was 40 seconds behind the optimal positioning. The communication with Ida could have been faster. She wrote 40 seconds, that's the gap. She underlined it. She wrote, closing this gap is the next priority. Aizawa, sitting nearby being attended to, saw her writing. He said, "You're doing a post-incident assessment." She said, "Yes." He said, "In the incident." She said, "The assessment is more accurate when the sensory data is fresh." He said, "I've taught for years. You're the first student I've seen do that." She said, "I can send you the methodology notes if they'd be useful." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Yes, send them." She wrote 4 pages of methodology notes that evening and sent them through the school system. She received a reply the next morning that said, "Competent." She wrote in her notebook, Aizawa said competent. She drew a star. She wrote, from Aizawa that is equivalent to a standing ovation. She drew another star. Her father read about the USJ in the news. He called her that evening. She answered immediately. He said, "I saw the reports." She said, "I'm okay." He said, "I know, I called your mother first." She said, "Correct order again." He said, "Yes." He said, "Tell me what happened, not the news version, the actual version." She told him. All of it, the probability map failure and the warp gate variable, and the 40-second gap, and the Uraraka coordination, and the post-incident assessment. He listened to all of it. He said, "The 40 seconds. She said, "Yes." He said, "You're already working on it." She said, "I have a new training framework starting Monday, specifically targeting the gap." He said, "Can I see it?" She said, "It's in notebook 23, I'll bring it Thursday." He said, "Toshi." She said, "Yes." He said, "You're okay." She said, "Yes, I said that." He said, "I know, I needed to say it from my side too." She was quiet. She said, "I understand." He said, "The first time something real happened to you that I wasn't there for." She said, "You couldn't have been there, you retired because you can't." He said, "I know why I wasn't there, I know the reason is correct, the feeling and the reason are different things." She said, "Yes." She said, "I know that distinction." He said, "You wrote about it." She said, "Notebook 1, the angry version." He said, "Yes." They were quiet. He said, "I am glad you called Uraraka." She said, "I didn't call her, we were in the same place and we coordinated." He said, "That's better than calling." She said, "Yes, it is." He said, "She's important." She said, "Yes." He said, "The analysis." She said, "The structural warmth, yes." He said, "Keep her close." She said, "She's on the load-bearing list." He said, "The load-bearing list." She said, "The people who can hold the weight of the actual version of things. I've been building the list since I got here." He said, "How long is it?" She said, "Getting longer." He said, "Am I on it?" She said, "You are the reason I started making it." He was quiet. She said, "Thursday, bring your appetite." He said, "I always bring my appetite." She said, "I know, it's very consistent." He said, "Some things are consistent." She said, "Yes." She said, "Good night, Dad." He said, "Good night, Toshi." She wrote about the call. She wrote, "He called me second, Mom first. That's the correct order and he knows it's the correct order and he does it anyway without being asked." She wrote, "Structural consideration for other people, not just me, for my mother who has been doing the actual work for 16 years." She wrote, "That's the load-bearing element, right there." She underlined it. The sports festival was the first time the question went public. Not about her identity, the secret held. What went public was the question of who she was as a hero, what her specific approach meant, what it looked like from outside, what it said about the next generation. She performed in the sports festival the way she performed in everything. Not for the cameras, not for the audience, for the specific purpose of finding out where her current limits were and what they said about the work remaining. The cavalry battle was where it became visible. She had spent the preliminary round gathering information, not aggressively, She had let the round reveal what it would about how each person operated, and she had stored everything, and by the time the cavalry battle started, she had more data on the field than anyone, except possibly Midoriya, who had been doing the same thing from his own angle. She built her team with the data. Not the obvious team, not the highest combat power team, the most structurally coherent team, the people whose specific capabilities created a load distribution that could manage what was coming. They held their headband. Not because they were the most powerful team, because she had mapped the attack vectors and positioned against each of them before they arrived. The commentators noted something. One of them said, Team 4 seems to know where the attacks are coming from before they happen. The other said, it's not seems like, look at the positioning, that's not reaction, that's anticipation. The first said, who is Team 4's leader? The second said, Yagi Toshi, first year, no previous hero school enrollment. Entrance exam rescue score was highest in recorded history. The first said, highest in recorded history. The second said, yes. The first said, and the name. The second said, Yagi. The first said, any relation to. The second said, the commission would have flagged a relation. The first said, yes, they would have. They moved on. The question floated. Unasked directly, unclaimed publicly, but present in the air in the way that questions were present when the answer was visible to people who knew how to look. She watched the replays that evening. She watched the moment the commentator had said the name. She wrote, the question is beginning to surface, not confirmed, not public, but the structural pattern is becoming visible to people who know how to read structural patterns. She wrote, I need to talk to my father about timeline. She called him that evening. She said, the commentators. He said, I watched. She said, the question is forming. He said, yes. She said, what do we do? He said, what do you want to do? She thought about this. She said, I want to choose the moment, the same way I choose everything, with full information and a clear justification. He said, then we choose it. She said, not yet. He said, when? She said, when it matters for the right reason, not because the question is forming, because telling creates something more than concealing does. He said, what would that look like? She said, I'll know it when I see it. He said, okay. She said, you trust that? He said, I trust your assessment of structural moments. You have better eyes for that than anyone I know. She said, including you. He said, especially me. I was always better at the intervention than the structural analysis. She said, that's in Notebook 8. He said, I know, page 34. She said, you remember the page. He said, I've reread Notebook 8 several times. She said, why? He said, because it's the most accurate description of the symbol function, and its costs that I have ever read, and I spent 30 years inside, that function and I couldn't have written that clearly about it. He said, your mother's precision. She said, and your proximity to the subject matter. He said, yes. He said, Toshi. She said, yes. He said, however this moment reveals itself, whatever you decide, I will support it. She said, I know. He said, I want you to know I know it's yours to decide, not mine. She said, it's both of ours. He said, yes, but more yours. She wrote about it. She wrote, he said it's both of ours but more mine. He understands the load distribution correctly. She wrote, the load-bearing list is getting longer, and he's at the top of it. She drew a star. The moment arrived in November. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. It arrived in the ordinary way of things that had been building for a while, as the natural next thing when everything that preceded it had created the conditions for it. She was in the library. There was a student from Class 1B. She had analysis on him, a good analysis, a fair one. He was not unkind. He was someone who connected things, who noticed patterns and made them vocal because making them vocal was how he processed. He sat across from her. He said, Yagi Toshi. She said, yes. He said, the name. She said, yes. He said, I've been thinking about it. She said, I know. He said, All Might's name is Yagi Toshinori. Your name is Yagi Toshi. You entered as a clean registration, but the similarity. She said, yes. He went quiet. He said, is it? She said, yes. He said, you're. She said, yes. He absorbed this. He said, no one knows. She said, 3 people in this school, now 4. He said, why are you telling me? She said, because you had already followed the structural pattern to the correct conclusion, and telling you directly was more honest than letting you carry the question. He said, that's a specific reason. She said, I have notebooks about honesty. He looked at her. He said, what do you need from me? She said, to let this be something you know rather than something you discuss, until I choose the moment. He said, you're choosing the moment. She said, yes. He said, okay. He said, I can do that. She said, thank you. He stood up. He paused. He said, is all might? She said, he's okay, getting better at being Toshinori Yagi again after 30 years of All Might. He said, that sounds hard. She said, I have a notebook on the transition process. He reads it on alternate Thursdays. He looked at her. He said, you wrote a notebook to help your father transition out of being the symbol of peace. She said, Notebook 9, Structural Analysis of Identity Transition in Retired High-Profile Heroes, with specific application notes. He said, that's. He stopped. He said, that's one of the most quietly extraordinary things I've ever heard. She said he needed a framework. I build frameworks. He left. She wrote 4 people at UA now. The load-bearing list is structural and functioning. She wrote, the moment is getting closer. She wrote, I am almost ready. She chose the moment in December. Not because it was forced, not because someone had gone public, or the commission had filed something, or any external pressure had determined the timing. Because December was when her father came to the school. Not publicly, officially he was there for a consultation with Nezu regarding the retirement transition and the institutional continuity documentation that the commission required. Routine, no announcement. She had arranged it. Not the official reason that was genuine, Nezu had requested the consultation. She had arranged the timing. She had looked at the moment and understood that this was the one, not because of any dramatic external factor, but because it was right. Because the structural conditions were correct. Because the people who mattered were in the right configuration, and the weight she had been carrying and he had been carrying could finally be set down in a space where the floor was strong enough. He arrived at UA in the coat that was too large. She met him at the entrance. They walked in together. The hall was not empty, it was between classes. Students from multiple years were moving through it with the specific purposeful energy of people navigating a transition moment. She walked in with him. She did not announce anything. She just walked next to him. Side by side. The hall noticed. The hall did what halls did when something notable entered them, the specific shift in attention that moved through a crowd like a wave. People stopped. Not all of them, enough. Midoriya saw first. She had expected this. His analysis on everyone was accurate, and she was in his analysis, and he had known the specific thing she was walking in with. He stopped in the hallway. He looked at them. He looked at the coat too large. He looked at her. He looked at the way they moved next to each other, the specific quality of 2 people who had learned to walk next to each other at Thursday dinners and had the easy natural rhythm of it. His face did something she had written about in Notebook 22. It did the thing it did when something real arrived that he had been hopping for, without letting himself fully hope. Uraraka was beside him. She looked. She knew she had known since the roof. But knowing and seeing were different, and she was seeing now, and her face did the full version of itself, the warm one, the structural one. Aizawa was at the far end of the hall. He looked at Toshinori Yagi walking next to a first-year student, named Yagi Toshi. He looked at them for a long moment. He filed the information with the specific organized precision that he brought to everything. He nodded. Just that. The nod that meant the structural analysis is complete. The conclusion is correct, proceeding accordingly. She looked at her father. He was looking at the hall full of people looking at them. She said quietly, okay. He said quietly, more than okay. She said, we don't have to stay long. He said, I'd like to stay. She said, the cafeteria has food. He said, I assumed. She said, a significant amount. He said, I'm very hungry. She said, I know. They walked to the cafeteria. The hall watched them go. The official acknowledgement came from the commission 3 weeks later. Not because she demanded it, because Nezu requested it, a quiet formal acknowledgement that the existing arrangement was being updated to reflect a documentation change, that the student enrollment record for Yagi Toshi would be updated to reflect family information previously withheld for documented safety reasons, that the commission considered the matter resolved. Standard language. Enormous weight. She read the document in her dorm room on a Tuesday evening. She wrote, the documentation is updated, the official record reflects accurately. She wrote, I have been Yagi Toshi the whole time, now the record knows it too. She wrote, my father read the document this afternoon, he called me afterward. She wrote, he said, it's in writing now. She wrote, I said, I know. She wrote, he said, I like things being accurate. She wrote, I said, I know that too, I have notebooks about it. She wrote, he laughed. She wrote, the real one. She drew 3 stars. The year ended the way the year ended. She was on the roof. The usual people in the usual spots. It had become the usual configuration over a year that had built it, the people who had found the roof for the same reason and had found each other there, and had made it theirs through the accumulated weight of being there consistently. Midoriya writing, obviously. Uraraka, the full version of herself, the structural warmth at full extension. Ida, the deliberate posture of someone who had chosen to be somewhere, and was being somewhere with full commitment. Bakugo, against the wall, present. That was the whole of what Bakugo did with places that mattered, he was present in them. She had 3 pages about this in Notebook 23, and she stood by all of them. Todoroki looking at the city, the load-bearing thing in him lighter than it had been in September, not gone, lighter. She sat in the middle of it. She wrote, end of first year, roof, the usual configuration. She wrote, I have 31 notebooks now, more than I predicted entering the year. The prediction was 25. I recalibrate the prediction to 42 for second year. She wrote, the load-bearing list is 11 people now. This is the highest number it has ever been, significantly higher than any previous period. I have written about what this means. She wrote, it means the structure is stronger than it was. She wrote, it means more can be held. She wrote, it means the building I am building is getting walls. She looked at the city. She thought about the dinner in Tokyo that lasted 4 hours and 31 notebooks, and the letter that took 2 years, and the real smile arriving in Notebook 8 page 34, and the specific combination of her mother's precision and her father's stubbornness, and 17 probability maps, and the things that resisted quantification. She thought about the hall and the coat too large, and walking in side by side and Midoriya's face, doing the thing it did, and Aizawa's nod and the cafeteria with a significant amount of food. She thought about the structure she was going to build. She thought about what came after symbols. She wrote, I am going to be the thing that comes after symbols. She wrote, not a replacement symbol, not the symbol of Peace's daughter stepping into the symbol's shape, something structurally different. She wrote, something that distributes the load instead of centralizing it, something that builds capacity in the people around it instead of creating dependency on it, something that is stronger because of how it connects to other things rather than despite it. She wrote, I have notebooks about how. She looked at the last line. She wrote, I always have notebooks about how. She wrote, that's the whole project. She wrote, that's always been the whole project. She closed Notebook 31. She opened Notebook 32. She wrote at the top, second year. She wrote under it, the structure is getting walls. She wrote under that, keep building. She looked at the 3 lines. She kept all 3. She looked at the city. She looked at the people on the roof. She breathed. She began. And that is the complete story of Yagi Toshi. The daughter nobody knew about, who had 2 notebooks about her father and 31 about everything else, and who walked into UA carrying the specific combination of her mother's precision and her father's stubbornness and her own 17 probability maps. Who found the roof in week 2, who told the truth on it, who walked into the hall in December with her father beside her in the coat too large and let the hall see what the hall was ready to see. Who is building the structure that comes after symbols. Not loudly, not dramatically, with load-bearing lists and structural analysis and Thursday dinners and notebooks. The way good structures are always built. Carefully, precisely, from the foundation up. No cap, she was built different before she ever said a word. And 32 notebooks are going to prove it. Every single page. If you made it to the very end of this complete story, then you are absolutely Fiction Flux family, and we love you for it. Please subscribe and hit that like button and share this video with every single anime fan you know, because every share helps us grow and reach more people who love these stories as much as we do. It genuinely means everything to us, and we see every one of you who watches all the way through. Drop in the comments what topic you want us to cover next, because we make these for you, and we want to know what worlds you want to explore together. See you in the next one.